Good evening. Thank you for being here. And I didn't know you were back. I just heard your chanting voice. I'm like, wow, Lark is back. So wonderful to have our residents go away and come back and experience the world and bring the practice with them out in the world and then come back to practice again. So wonderful. So before I begin, I just want to, of course, thank my teacher who is here, Roshi Joan. Thank you for teaching me so patiently and showing me day to day, moment by moment, what it is to live a life of service. Thank you. And to provide us with this beautiful place to practice. And this past weekend was the Grace program. So I want to thank my teachers, Tony, Cinda, and Roshi, who were teaching, and I had the honor of teaching with them. This was my first program that brought me to Upaya in 2016. So it's always wonderful to be part of that program. And also this time we had 60 people here and 60 people online. And 16 of the people here were all the way from Japan. So I want to thank Kimiko for organizing that. And she has this amazing way of simultaneously translating the whole weekend. It's this miraculous superpower where you're listening and speaking at the same time. No idea how she does it. And I also want to thank the Nomads Clinic team. They've been preparing diligently for the last 9 months for this pilgrimage and service work up in the high Himalayas that Roshi started many, many years ago. And we were planning to go. Many people were supposed to leave tomorrow to fly to Nepal for this trip. But we had to cancel last night because of what is going on in Nepal. And for those of you who don't know, because there's so much news nowadays that sometimes it gets buried, Nepal has been in turmoil. The young people in Nepal has been protesting a couple days ago. It was a peaceful protest in the beginning, but it turned violent when the military turned on them and killed a number of them, like 19 of them in the beginning. And then it became very violent. The parliament building was burnt. And the old guard escaped and left of the government. So now the country is without leadership and is under military rule. So, so that's why we had to cancel the trip. It was a lot of grief and sadness. But the young people there were protesting because they were protesting a lack of opportunity in the country. They have been suffering because the unemployment rate is really high. And they were protesting the corruption of the government. They were protesting people who are in power, who have money, were just uncaring of the people there. They were flaunting their wealth on social media. The elite there and their children, post on social media about how, what their life is like, their luxury goods. And so that really riled up a lot of anger. And that really shows that disconnection to the people, people in power. It shows the lack of empathy and compassion. And, on top of that, of course, we have the genocide in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and what is going on in this country. The dehumanization of people who are coming here to look for a better life. And I'm one of them. I'm an immigrant. Also, gun violence. right? So with all of this and the climate crisis as the backdrop of our life and our practice, and we can characterize all these things that are going on as a lack of compassion for both human beings and beyond human. And, characterize it as dehumanization and alienation. So with this backdrop, our Bodhisattva vows, our commitment to live a life of service, and also to bring to surface our own greed, hatred, and delusion, and to transform them. Our vows to alleviate suffering and to engage in compassionate action. It seems way more important than ever. I remember that, some years ago, I think 2020, I asked Roshi to be ordained. I remember sitting up on the porch at the refuge, looking out at the field and seeing that orange sky of smoke. That was the forest fires. And then since then, we've had many forest fires. But also at that time, I was thinking about my colleagues who were working in the pandemic, who were overwhelmed, some were dying. And making that decision to ask Roshi if I could ordain as a priest. I didn't really know what that meant at that time. I didn't know what that would actually mean for my life. But I did know that I wanted to commit my life to service, to the Bodhisattva path. And then also knowing that I'm by nature an undisciplined person, so that I know that I will need the support of my teacher, of the Sangha, of the lineage, to even attempt to fulfill these vows. And it felt really urgent at that time. And this moment actually feels even more urgent. So it's an urgent need for me to look at my vows again and make sure that I am living in an aligned way. And you're probably more disciplined and committed than I am, so most of you don't need to shave your head in order to live the Bodhisattva vows. But either way, the vows, to me, is a rudder for us in these times, as we're called to serve in this burning world. Dogen Zenji, in the 70th fascicle in the Shobogenso, Hotsu Bodaishin, which is translated as arousing the aspiration for enlightenment. He said, whether you are a lay person, a home leaver, a deva, or a human, whether you are suffering or in bliss, you should quickly arouse the aspiration for bringing others across before yourself, bringing others across to enlightenment. Although the realm of sentient beings is neither bounded nor boundless, you should arouse the aspiration for bringing others across before yourself. This is the aspiration for enlightenment. And this morning, if you were with us, we renewed our vows in the Fusatsu ceremony. We do this every full moon. We're a few days late this time because this weekend was the Grace training. And every time we get to the 3 pure mind precepts, which is do no harm, do good, and do good for others, it always reminds me of the Hippocratic oath that I took on the first day of medical school in what we call the white coat ceremony, when we're given this white coat and we take this vow. And as a physician, I went into medicine because I wanted to serve. I wanted to bring compassion into the world. But I actually had no idea what that meant at that time. And as I went through, med school and residency, I learned so much about the human body, illnesses, how to, heal illnesses in our bodies. But I never actually heard the word compassion, never heard it defined, never heard it emphasized. At that time, I thought compassion was a personality trait, like charisma. Either you have it or you don't. Maybe, compassion is like that really nice person. That's not me. Sometimes I think that compassion at that time, the way that it's taught to us, it's a script. This is what you do when you sit with a patient. You look them in the eyes, you put your hand on their hand, and you speak slower. And that's compassion. But if it's a personality trait, and if you're born with it, and either you have it or you don't, I didn't think that I had it. And many people didn't think so either. So it seems like the most important thing is to just focus on the medical skills, the technicalities of medicine, and not to worry about it. Because it's not that important anyways. Nobody really taught us about it, right? And Roshi said when she was a medical anthropologist, she had noticed a lack of compassion in the medical system that she worked in. And over this past year, sitting with my dad's illness and Roshi's surgeries, I've had a lot of time on the other side, just observing the medical medicine in motion. And I notice what happens when there is compassion and what happens when there's not compassion and there's just technicality. So when Roshi was invited to be a visiting scholar at the Library of Congress in 2011, she entered into an inquiry about compassion. She explored, the questions about compassion. What is it, really? Is it trainable? Is there a way to train people to have more compassion, especially in the medical field? And so that we can bring more compassion into the system to alleviate suffering. And that was how the Grace compassion training was developed. And so this past weekend was the Grace training. And like I said, I was brought to Upai in 2016 because of this training. In 2016, I was working as an ER doc. At that time, I was a traveling doctor. I was working in Maine and staying in hotels and doing shifts and then sleeping in the hotel and then going back to New York City for breaks. I was really burnt out. And so one evening, I went online and I was just looking for anything that could help me. And as luck would have it, if not, I wouldn't be here. Thank you for Google for finding this for me. I found the Grace training. I signed up for it right away. And I had no idea what Zen was. I wasn't even interested in Buddhism because I was in a different tradition. And I certainly had no idea what a Bodhisattva was. I have none of this language or vocabulary. And I actually didn't know until years later. But actually, the Grace training was a Bodhisattva training. I had no idea. And because it was developed for clinicians in the beginning, that aspect is kind of a little hidden. And we don't really mention the Buddhist roots that much in the training. So if you were in the training this past weekend, I'm sorry to tell you, you were in a covert, aspiring Bodhisattva training. So now you're an aspiring Bodhisattva. And actually, even if people didn't know it, this weekend, the group here were all aspiring Bodhisattvas. There were clinicians, there were lawyers, there were coaches and teachers and activists and Upaya residents who are definitely aspiring Bodhisattvas. So one of the things that Roshi realized when she was studying this process or studying compassion, is that compassion is made of non-compassion elements. And each of these elements can be trained in the aspiring Bodhisattva to allow for compassion, which is context dependent and emergent, to spontaneously arise. So similar to that old saying that enlightenment happens by accident and practice makes you accident prone. Have you heard that before? Laughing. Compassion is emergent, but practice makes compassion more prone to emerge. So GRACE is an acronym, as those of you know who has taken this course, this training. So pop quiz. The G of GRACE. What is the G of GRACE? Gather what? Gather your attention. What does that mean? Why do you need to gather your attention? Anyone? So you can be grounded, yeah. Present. Be present, wonderful. Yeah, thank you. How about the R of GRACE? What's that stand for? What's R? Recall your intention. What does it mean to you? What's recalling your intention?
Remembering why you're where you are.
Remembering why you're where you are, yeah. Anyone else? Recalling your values, your deepest values that guide your life. How about the A of GRACE? What does that stand for? What's A?
Attune.
Attune. Attune to self first, and then the other. C. Consider what will serve. Yes, wonderful. Thank you. How about E? Engage in compassionate action, and then ending. So for the G of GRACE, the question that Roshi was exploring was, is compassion possible without attentional balance? So when you're in the presence of another person, can compassion arise if you are in fear, in prejudice, which is based on fear? And if your attention is in the 3Ds, is divided, is distracted, is dispersed, then we have kind of blinders on, or we're focusing on the wrong things. And in order to make compassion possible, we need to have a stable and relaxed nervous system that is open to perceive reality in a way that is completely inclusive of all things. So in our chant and our 4 vows, we chant, reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. So how do we expand our consciousness enough to be able to perceive the boundlessness of every moment? So in this training, the first thing we do is that we focus on gathering our attention. And that is also the same first step when we sit down to sit zazen, right? we sit down, we relax. And in chaplaincy, we talk about cultivating a non-anxious presence. So more practically, if we find ourselves in an environment that is full of distractions, which is pretty much everywhere, we cultivate a way to ground ourselves. So this was very helpful to me when I was an ER doc, when I first learned this, because the ER is an extreme place of multitasking, of distractions. I would find myself talking to a patient, trying to be present, but then I'm actually thinking about 50 different things. I'm thinking about what I might need to do next. Maybe, oh, what did I miss with the last patient? And then someone would pop their head in and hand me an EKG of someone else's heart to ask me to see if they're having a heart attack. And then you have to shift back immediately to the patient in front of you and try to have a connection. So that ability to state shift quickly, to ground ourselves quickly in the middle of all these distractions is so important. Not just for the ER, but everywhere, right? Whenever we are out and about, there can be so many distractions. But more often for me, nowadays, I find myself distracted by my own mind on the cushion. Instead of someone handing me an EKG to sign, I hand myself countless scenarios to navigate. So I practice gathering my attention, dropping my attention into my body, relaxing into a space of non-conceptuality when I'm sitting, and then gently letting go of my stories, my opinions, because creations are numberless. I vow to free them. That way I can perceive the boundless reality of every breath and of every moment. The second letter in grace is the R of grace, recalling our intention. It is about recalling our vows and embodying our deep intention to serve. Our Bodhisattva attitude of generosity, of uprightness, of openness, and of patience. We teach in the training that our body helps us to remember by embodying a posture of dignity, of integrity, and of uprightness. And when we're out of integrity, we can feel it in our bodies. Sometimes we might feel a feeling of dread, or maybe a constriction in our bellies or our throat. And if we habitually ignore these signals, we can no longer detect that we're misaligned. So we teach to bring our attention back in our body, to not ignore those signals. And Roshi so often talk about motivation versus intention. Motivation, sometimes these two words are used interchangeably in the secular world, but we define it differently here. So we talk about motivations coming from our conditioning. And they can be pre-conscious. We might not know that they're there. And when we talk about being ourselves, a common question is, which ourselves? How do we know that we're really being ourselves and not the conditioning that we bring in? I was listening to a Dharma talk by Guogu, not the two that he gave here, but on his own, in his own center. He was talking about taking refuge. And he was talking about how ordinary people, ordinary life, all of us actually, take refuge in things that are outside of the Bodhisattva values. For example, fame, profit, power and status, influence, and just being attractive and beautiful. And there are many more. But these are the 6 that he gave as examples. Dogen says in that same fascicle that the aspiration, the bodhisattva aspirations, are not pervasive in this world of phenomena. But what is pervasive are these common values, these values that are based on our conditioning. So the question is, do you know if you're on autopilot of these kind of conditioned values? And how do we know? When we read the news these days, it seems like we're actually reading about these 6 things in extreme manifestations, right? We're at a time, I don't know if it's always true or not, but it feels like more now that the world stage, the news is dominated by examples of people who are completely engulfed by these 6 things, these conditioned values, completely unchecked. Like my example, of Nepal, of the people who are in power in Nepal. And the reason that is so, that these values are unchecked, is because our social structures, our industries, our cities are all built around these values, actually. And we can't really escape them. I was talking to a fellow New Yorker recently, that when you walk down the streets of New York City, you're pulled by, shops, by restaurants, by billboards. You need to make yourself more beautiful and attractive. You need a job like this and this amount of money so that you can be powerful. You need to pose like this in the hot restaurants and to give yourself more influence as an influencer. And even though I love the city, I love that energy there still, and I still go there sometimes, I notice that I get pulled in as I walk down the street. I notice these grasping, these conditioned responses to different things. And now I notice that this is suffering. This is suffering too. And so when I read the news and see all these people that are so bound by these conditions and also causing harm because of it, I try to recognize that that is suffering too. But we also know from Rebecca's teaching, Rebecca Solnit, who's here somewhere. Oh, hi, Rebecca. That despite of all of this, even if it may not be in the news, because reporting on the manifestations of those 6 things is way more salacious, we see people stepping up, people being kind to each other, people who help each other in crisis. So how do we make ourselves more prone to be part of this kind of grassroots movements in the time of crisis? The Chinese phrase for crisis, 危机 or 危機 in Cantonese, Did I pronounce that right in Mandarin? It's the combination of the two words danger and opportunity. So what kind of opportunity is this for us? The R of grace, recalling our intention. Cinda always asks, what do we stand for? What are the actual values that are guiding our lives? Like we said, the A of grace has two parts. Attuning to ourselves first before we attune to others. When we attune to ourselves, we courageously see what is true for us in this moment. What are the motivations that might be preconscious, that are tugging at us? What are those 6 things that are our conditioned response that are tugging in the background? And also, what is holding us, like our opinions, our views, our conditioning, that might be affecting the version of reality that we might be perceiving. A version that might be limited because of this. So before we can attune to the other person or others, we have to attune to ourselves first so that we can see the other person as whole and see the whole situation in front of us. The C of grace, consider what will serve. So are there other parts of reality that we can open ourselves to? Cinda, again, always asks, what else might be true? And this is similar to in Zen, we say, don't know mind, or beginner's mind. Usually for me, the constriction comes from judging another person by what they've done or what they've said, especially if it's hurtful to me or it's something I don't like. Then I narrow that person into a caricature of themselves. I label them as a bad person, right? So that I'm not able to see the full dimension of this person. John Paul Lederach, our peacemaker, our wonderful teacher, he talks about rehumanizing, the rehumanizing work in conflict transformation. It's so easy to see the other or your opponents as abstract threats or evil entities. So we have to have the courage to confront our dehumanizing language and behavior. Because when we strip away the humanity of the other, we lose our capacity to be empathetic. We lose our ability to understand. And ultimately, we lose our ability to come to a peaceful resolution. So when we resist what is going on, we resist the whole truth of reality, we close ourselves off from being able to really serve. And when I talk about Roshi again, when she was in the hospital, when she was very sick with actual complications, she was still joking. She said that in the Hokyo Sanmai, the Jewel Mirror Samadhi that we chant in liturgy, there's a line that says, complications are auspicious. Do not resist them. But at that time she said, auspicious is too upbeat for right now. So she changed it to complications are a teaching. I vow to learn from them. So opening ourselves to learning, to whatever is before us, not turning away from suffering. And then we come to the E of grace. It is engaging in the compassionate action and then also ending. And because I'm still thinking about the Nomads Clinic, I'm going to have to tell you some nomad stories. And Nomads Clinic, for many of us who has been, a few of you are here who has been, Rebecca, Fushin, Kado, Roshi, of course. Especially for our Western clinicians, it's an experience of compassion in a context of medical care, but in a non-transactional way. And for many of us in medicine, that's actually the first time that we have encountered compassion in this way. And on the surface, it looks like, we're going there to do good work. We're providing a service to people who need it. But really, to me and many of the clinicians who've been there, we gain a lot more than those we serve. And that's the thing with compassion. It's not a one-way street. So I'll tell you a little story about our wonderful, wonderful dentist, Dr. Prabhu. You might have heard this story once before, but such a wonderful man. I'm going to miss seeing him this year. He's always smiling, always energetic. He's, the person we can count on to be singing on the high passes as we're trekking up these really high passes at 18,000 feet. He would be running down the snowbank, humming and whistling, and always just cheerful. And he told us a story that exemplifies how compassion is a two-way street, and maybe more ways, and you'll see why. And it always feeds the giver and the receiver, so that both becomes the giver and both becomes the receiver. And it's always inspiring also to those who witness it. So Dr. Prabhu, if you're listening now or later, thank you. He is on the team, hands down, the person who relieves the most suffering. Maybe combined with everyone else. Because if you've ever had a toothache, you'll know how much suffering that is. And to relieve hundreds of people of toothache, that's just amazing. Because in these high mountain villages, there are no dentists who stay there permanently. There are some health aides up there and nurses who are trained with very simple tooth extractions that are very relieving, but they can't do everything. So Dr. Prabhu told us that last September at this time, in one of our clinics, there was a man who came in to the clinic, to the dental clinic, who has really bad toothache, and he's had it for like 2 years. Can you imagine that? When I have a toothache, I go immediately to my dentist and beg them to take me. And this man has been dealing with it for 2 years. He's gone to other nurses, the nurses and health aides that are up there in the mountains. They have tried to remove this tooth, but they were unsuccessful because I think it was a wisdom tooth that was causing the pain. And they tried, 3 people tried. So you can imagine trying to get it out, that's going to cause even more pain, right? So by the time he got to Dr. Porbu in our clinic, he was so scared. So Dr. Porbu was like, don't worry, I will make sure to numb you really well and I will try my best. And, with his wonderful, kind self, the man laid down on the dental chair. And Dr. Porbu tried. He tried for 45 minutes to extract this tooth that's completely just stuck in there. Tried all the different methods, just wouldn't budge. He was sweating. There were like 20 people waiting outside for dental care. He was like, oh, but I really need to get this because this man is really suffering. After 45 minutes, unsuccessful. He was about to give up. But then he thought to himself, I need to try one more time because this man is going to suffer. How is he going to get this tooth out if I don't try? I am the only dentist here. So he grounded himself, took a breath, positioned himself in a different way, and tried again. This time, it came out. Success, finally. Whew. The man was so grateful. Of course, he was so happy that this was done. He was finally pain-free. He came back the next day with food, with the kata, the scarves, ceremonial scarves, presented it to Dr. Porbu, and they just had this great moment of gratitude. Not just gratitude from the man to Dr. Porbu, but Dr. Porbu was so grateful to the man to have trusted him with this and so grateful to be able to relieve suffering. They just had this beautiful moment of connection. And so when Dr. Porbu told us the story, he said, now when I face anything difficult and I'm about to give up, I will think of this and try one more time. I miss him. So to end, this is the end of Shantideva's Bodhisattva prayer. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of this world. Thank you.